Before we dive, let me know and comment where are you from and what time is it, and subscribe to Eerie Hour. The cruise ship had left the harbor under the bright summer sun, its decks alive with excitement as passengers prepared for a relaxing journey across the open sea. Among the thousands of guests on board was a young couple, Anna and Jeff, who had been dreaming of this trip for years. It was supposed to be their perfect escape, a break from their busy lives, filled with dinners under the stars and quiet mornings by the pool. But from the very moment they boarded the majestic Voyager, something about the ship felt strange. The vessel was enormous, its white and navy blue hull gleaming under the sunlight. Inside, everything looked luxurious. Marble floors, sparkling chandeliers, and wide windows showing endless blue water. Yet beneath all that beauty, there was a heaviness in the air, as if the ship carried a secret no one else could feel. The other passengers laughed and wandered about, unaware of the strange tension that seemed to hang like a shadow over the elegant decks. That evening, as the sun disappeared and the stars shimmered above, Anna and Jeff strolled along the deck, enjoying the cool breeze. Then they noticed someone standing at the far end, a woman in a torn, old-fashioned white gown, staring out at the water. Her long black hair waved gently in the wind, and her pale face looked empty, full of sadness. Curious, Anna stepped closer, planning to ask if she was all right. But before she could speak, the woman turned her head. Her eyes were hollow, lifeless, and her mouth opened in silence, as though she was trying to speak but couldn't. It looked like she was trying to warn them. Before Anna could react, the woman vanished into the night, swallowed by the darkness. Shaken, the couple brushed it off, convincing themselves that they were just tired or imagining things. Yet, the uneasy feeling followed them. Later that night, as they got ready for bed, a strange knocking sound echoed through their cabin. It was soft at first, tap, 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 like someone knocking gently from inside the walls. Hours passed, and the sound grew louder, more urgent. Jeff assumed it was just the ship settling, but the noise didn't stop. It grew almost frantic. Finally, he went to check, searching the hallways and corners, but found nothing. The knocking stopped the moment he returned, leaving a deep, uncomfortable silence behind. Over the next few days, more strange things began happening. Other passengers seemed carefree, laughing and dancing, completely unaware. But every night, the knocking came back, louder, closer. Sometimes Anna would wake up in the dark and feel as if someone was standing at the corner of the room watching her. But when she turned on the light, the corner was empty. Still, the air in their cabin always felt heavy and cold, as if unseen eyes were watching. One night, the ship sailed into a storm. The waves weren't violent, but the sea roared outside and the lights flickered inside their room, casting shifting shadows across the walls. The knocking started again, louder than ever, and this time, it came with faint whispering. The voices were soft, desperate, speaking in a language neither of them could understand. Fear gripped them both. They ran to the reception desk, desperate for help, but the crew members didn't seem surprised. The receptionist, an older woman with a stiff smile, simply said, "It's the ship's old story, dear. Happens to most new guests. Don't worry, the storm will pass, and so will the oddities." Then her expression turned cold, and she waved them away. That night, the knocking grew violent. It was no longer soft. It sounded like fists pounding against the walls. Anna clung to Jeff as the temperature in the room dropped, freezing the air around them. Out of the corner of her eye, Anna saw movement. When she turned, her breath caught in her throat. The woman in white stood in the corner again, but now her dress was soaked, dripping with seawater, and her skin was a ghastly gray. She raised a trembling hand and pointed toward the window. Her mouth moved, but still no sound came out. Her eyes, full of terror, pleaded with Anna to understand. The ship creaked and groaned as if alive, and the air grew colder still. Then the woman's body began to twist unnaturally, stretching and distorting, her face twisting into a mask of agony. The floor seemed to pulse beneath them, shadows stretching toward her. Anna covered her ears as a scream, inaudible yet echoing deep in her mind, filled her head. In a flash, the woman disappeared, leaving behind only a suffocating silence. The next morning, pale and shaken, Anna and Jeff went to see the captain. The man listened carefully, his expression grim. "Her name was Sarah," he said softly. "She was one of the original passengers many years ago. She vanished during a voyage just like this one. Her body was never found. The crew said she fell overboard, but others, they think something darker took her." He glanced nervously over his shoulder before continuing. "The ship has a past, Disappearances, strange sounds, restless spirits. Some say the souls of the lost still walk these halls. Others believe something much worse hides below the waves. For the rest of the trip, Anna and Jeff tried to ignore what was happening, but the sounds wouldn't stop. The knocking came every night, and the pale woman's ghostly figure appeared again and again, each time looking more desperate, more broken. When the cruise finally ended, the ship docked without incident, but the fear didn't leave with them. Even after they returned home, they couldn't escape the feeling that something had followed them. Years later, Anna and Jeff would still wake in the middle of the night hearing faint knocks on the wall, whispers just beyond hearing, and the soft cry of a woman's voice carried by the silence. And every time they closed their eyes, they could still see her, standing on the deck beneath the moonlight, staring out into the black ocean, waiting for someone to listen to her warning. Next story. It was a calm night, and the sea stretched endlessly around the luxury cruise ship. Neptune's Glory. Everything seemed perfect. Guests sipped cocktails by the pool, laughed with friends, and enjoyed the warm ocean breeze. Yet beneath all that cheer, there was an uneasy feeling, a strange coldness no one could explain. The ship had left Miami days earlier, and everything had gone smoothly until now. Then, small, odd things began to happen. At night, some passengers heard faint whispers in the hallways. Crew members, usually polite and cheerful, became quiet and uneasy. The entertainment shows were suddenly canceled, and the captain stopped appearing in public. Whispers spread among the passengers, rumors of strange happenings on earlier voyages. Most laughed it off, calling it nonsense. But on the fourth night, things changed. A few passengers sat together in the lounge after dinner, nervous but curious. One of them, a middle-aged man named Daniel, shared his experience. He said that earlier that night, he had found a door open that should have been locked. It led to the ship's lower maintenance deck, an area where no passengers were allowed. Curiosity had gotten the better of him, and he stepped through, walking down a long, dim corridor. "I swear," Daniel said, his voice trembling. "I heard something, a sound like someone crying. It was faint, coming from one of the rooms, but when I looked inside, there was nothing, just darkness and silence." The group went quiet, their laughter fading. Uneasy glances passed around the table. No one spoke for several seconds. The hum of his ship and the faint creak of metal were the only sounds that remained. None of them knew it yet, but the whispers that haunted Daniel would soon spread through the ship, and before the voyage was over, everyone on board would come to fear the empty halls of Neptune's Glory. Their waiter suddenly dropped a tray, the sound echoing through the lounge as glasses shattered across the floor. His hands trembled, and for a moment, everyone went silent. The group exchanged uneasy glances, realizing something was terribly wrong. Later that night, as the ship sailed into a part of the ocean known for its thick, blinding fog, the strange feeling grew stronger. A sudden announcement crackled through the loudspeaker, but the words were distorted, broken, and impossible to understand. It was the captain's voice, yet it sounded distant, warped, as though he were speaking from somewhere deep beneath the sea. "I think we're lost," whispered Margaret, one of the guests, sitting near the bar. "We're in the Bermuda Triangle, aren't we?" The others tried to laugh, but their voices shook. The air grew heavy, pressing against their chests, and the ship seemed to slow down as though something unseen was holding it in place. As the night dragged on, people began to vanish. At first, it was only one or two missing passengers, but by morning, over a dozen were gone. Rumors spread like wildfire through the decks. Some said they had seen shadowy shapes moving through the fog. Others swore they heard footsteps following them, but when they turned around, no one was there. The ship's halls grew quieter with every hour, and the cheerful laughter that once filled them was replaced by whispers and fear. But the true horror didn't show itself until the third night. A group of friends, Chris, Emily, and Hannah, decided they couldn't ignore it anymore. They had heard the same strange noises Daniel mentioned before, coming from the lower maintenance corridor. The crew avoids dead the area and acted strange whenever it was brought up. Determined to find answers, the trio agreed to explore it themselves. Maybe, they thought, if they uncovered what was really happening, the nightmare would finally make sense. It was just past midnight when they found the same door Daniel had spoken of. The hallway beyond it was dark and narrow, the air thick with the smell of metal and salt. Even the distant hum of the engines was gone. Only silence remained. Emily's flashlight flickered weakly, and Chris used his phone for light, but the glow dimmed as soon as they stepped farther in. They tried to laugh off the fear creeping over them, but it didn't help. The deeper they went, the colder it got. Then they heard it, the whispering. It was soft at first, like distant voices carried by the wind. Chris froze. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Emily and Hannah nodded, wide-eyed. The whispers grew louder, closer, dozens of voices murmuring all at once, impossible to understand, but filled with desperation. The sound came from every direction, bouncing off the walls. They spun around, their lights darting across the shadows, but there was no one there. Suddenly, a figure appeared ahead of them. At first, it looked like a crew member, but as it stepped forward, they realized something was terribly wrong. Its face was pale, hollow, and stretched tight over its bones. The eyes were dark and lifeless, and the clothes it wore were torn and soaked, like it had come straight from the bottom of the sea. Slowly, it raised its hand and pointed straight at them. Terrified, the friends turned and ran, the whispers now chasing them down the corridor. But when they reached the end, the door they had entered through was gone. In its place was only solid wall. Panic filled the air. Their phones wouldn't turn on, their flashlights flickered out, and all they could hear was the relentless chorus of whispers growing louder and louder. Desperate, they ran through another doorway that stood slightly open, hoping it led somewhere safe. But what waited inside was worse than anything they could have imagined. The room was freezing cold and filled with the smell of seawater and decay. It looked like an old storage area, full of broken furniture, rusted metal, and abandoned crates. But among the wreckage, they saw people, dozens of them. Their bodies were standing upright, perfectly still, eyes open but empty, faces frozen in silent screams. Time had stopped for them. In the center of the room stood the captain. His skin was gray, his uniform soaked, and his mouth was twisted open in terror. Emily gasped as the truth sank in. "They're not dead," she whispered. "They're trapped." The realization hit all three at once. The ship was cursed. The lost souls of its passengers and crew had become part of it, bound forever to the Neptune's glory. Those who wandered too deep were claimed by the ship, their spirits absorbed into its hull, destined to remain for eternity. Before they could escape, the heavy door slammed shut behind them, sealing them inside. The whispering rose to a deafening roar, circling them until everything went dark. The Neptune's glory was never seen again. No distress calls, no wreckage, no survivors. To this day, no record exists of its final voyage. Some say that on certain foggy nights, sailors spot its shadow on the horizon, a ghostly outline drifting aimlessly through the Bermuda Triangle, filled with the souls of those it took, still whispering for help that will never come. Next story. The ship had always been a symbol of freedom, a floating paradise where people could forget their worries and drift into peace. For most passengers, a cruise was a dream, but for those aboard the USS Paradise, that dream turned into a nightmare they would never escape. It began on the very first night. The USS Paradise was a grand vessel, shimmering under the lights as it cut through the Caribbean Sea. Its decks were alive with music and laughter. Pools sparkled, bars overflowed with happy travelers, and the air was filled with the scent of salt and perfume. Among the passengers were Lisa and her husband James, newlyweds celebrating their honeymoon, and two older friends, Margaret and Helen, who had decided to treat themselves to one last adventure. The first day passed beautifully, sunshine, cocktails, and laughter. But as night fell, Lisa began to notice something strange. The air around her would suddenly turn cold, bone-chilling cold, even when there was no wind. She would be sitting on the balcony, staring at the stars, when an icy draft swept through the room, freezing her skin. James brushed it off, saying it was probably just the ship's air system, but Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. By the third day, that unease grew stronger. The ship had docked at a small island, and most passengers left for day trips. But Lisa and James decided to stay behind. The decks were quiet, the halls empty. As Lisa walked through the lower levels of the ship, she heard faint footsteps echoing behind her. When she turned around, no one was there. Later that night, several guests complained of strange noises, doors rattling, windows shaking, but no one could explain it. Then, Helen vanished. She had been seen laughing at dinner with Margaret, but when the night ended, she was gone. Margaret searched everywhere, calling her friend's name through the empty corridors, but there was no answer. The crew insisted Helen must have gotten lost or returned to her room, yet no one saw her again. Lisa and James began asking questions, and one young crew member, a woman named Sarah, quietly warned them about the ship's dark history. She spoke of Captain Gregory Wells, the ship's original owner, a man obsessed with the sea who had died mysteriously during a voyage. And since then, strange things had haunted the USS Paradise. Some believed his spirit still roamed the halls, watching. At first, Lisa and James didn't believe her, but as the hours passed, the ship's atmosphere grew colder, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. One night, Lisa awoke to a hollow knocking at their cabin door. She crept closer, her heart pounding, and opened it slowly, but the hallway was empty. As she peered down the long corridor, she saw a figure at the far end. A man in a captain's uniform stood motionless, staring directly at her. His skin was pale, his eyes sunken, and his hands clutched the railing as though holding himself upright. Then she realized he wasn't alive. The next morning, chaos erupted. More passengers had vanished overnight. Fear spread through the ship like wildfire. People whispered about ghostly footsteps, reflections moving on their own in mirrors, and their names being whispered through locked doors. Panic set in as the truth became harder to ignore. The USS Paradise was no longer just a ship. It was a prison for restless souls, and something inside it was collecting more. The laughter and music were gone now, replaced by silence and dread. The sea around them was calm, but inside, a storm of terror had already begun. Lisa and James grew terrified when they realized the ship had left its last port of call. Now, they were trapped in the middle of the vast ocean with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Fear consumed them, but they knew they couldn't just wait for the end. They had to find answers. Together, they began searching every deck, every hallway, desperate to understand what was happening. That's when they stumbled upon an old, tattered journal buried beneath a stack of forgotten books in the ship's library. The cover was faded, but the name written inside made their blood run cold. It belonged to Captain Gregory Wells himself. Inside, the journal told the story of the captain's slow descent into madness. Page after page revealed Hatorio's, his obsession with the sea, his growing paranoia, and the thing he claimed to have encountered during one of his voyages, something ancient, powerful, and deeply evil. He wrote that the ship was cursed, doomed by whatever dark force lurked beneath the waves. In his desperation to protect his vessel, Captain Wells confessed he had made a pact, a terrible bargain that would seal his fate and the fate of anyone who dared sail aboard the Paradise. As Lisa and James read the final words, the truth became painfully clear. The ship wasn't just haunted, it was damned. The USS Paradise had become a prison between worlds, where the souls of the living and the dead were trapped together. That night, the once lively cruise turned into a nightmare. The laughter, the music, the warmth, all gone. The passengers were no longer vacationers. They were survivors trying to hold on to the last bit of hope that they might see land again. Lisa and James gathered the remaining passengers, begging the crew to abandon ship, but the ship's eerie pull was too strong. It was as if the ocean itself refused to let them go. One by one, the passengers disappeared. Some vanished quietly in their sleep, others were dragged away by unseen hands. In the end, only Lisa and James remained, their names forever carved into the ship's dark legend. When a rescue team finally found the USS Paradise drifting silently through the fog, the ship was empty. Every room, every hallway was still, as if frozen in time. Not a single person was found alive. The ship had been missing from radar for days, and when it finally reappeared, no one could explain what had happened. The world whispered about it for years afterward, retelling the story of the cursed vessel that haunted the sea. But those who dared speak of it always mentioned one haunting detail: the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the empty halls long after the ship was found. The next story began with the Golden Horizon, a grand and luxurious cruise ship known for its elegance and world-class service. Every year it departed from Miami, carrying passengers eager to experience paradise on the open sea. This voyage was no different. Fine dining, bright pools, and music that filled the nights. Among the hundreds aboard was Richard, a quiet man in his mid-60s. He had taken many cruises before, each one an escape from his grief. His wife, Martha, had passed away 2 years earlier, and the ocean had become his only peace. It reminded him of her, the calm waves, the salty air, the endless blue horizon. It was their place. This time, though, something felt wrong. Richard couldn't explain it, but there was a strange heaviness in the air. The crew smiled too often, their eyes tired and hollow, and the passengers seemed oddly cheerful, almost like they were pretending. He brushed it off at first, blaming his imagination, but that illusion shattered on the third night. While dining alone in the ship's grand restaurant, Richard noticed a woman sitting across the room. She wore a glittering 1920s-style dress, her dark curls neatly pinned, her pale face turned toward him. She smiled, not warmly, but emptily, and raised her hand in a slow, beckoning motion. Richard blinked, and she was gone. The spot where she had been sitting was empty. His stomach turned cold. He told himself it was a trick of the light, but deep down, he knew it wasn't. That night, he went to the deck to clear his head. The stars above seemed dimmer, and the air bit colder than before. He stood alone, gazing at the dark horizon, until he heard footsteps behind him. He spun around, but no one was there. Then came the whisper, faint but familiar, carried on the wind. "Richard." His heart skipped. The voice, it sounded just like Martha. He whispered her name, trembling. "Martha?" The aunt saws. Came again, closer this time. "Come to me." Richard turned, searching the shadows, but found nothing. Panic set in as the air grew heavy, the wind howling through the deck. He rushed back to his cabin, locking the door, trying to convince himself he was imagining things. But sleep never came. The knocking began soon after, soft at first, like gentle taps on the wall, then louder, faster. It came from the ceiling, the floor, the walls surrounding him. Tap, tap, tap. He covered his ears, but it grew unbearable, echoing like nails scraping through metal. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He threw open the door, stepping into the hall, empty. Just the dim glow of flickering lights and the low hum of the ship. Still, the knocking continued, drawing him toward the lower decks. The sound led him down narrow stairways into the ship's bowels, where the air smelled of rust and salt. He followed the noise to a half-open door at the end of a long, damp corridor. His heart pounded as he reached for the handle. When he pushed it open, a blast of cold air rushed past him, carrying the stench of rot. Inside was a forgotten room, filled with old chandeliers and faded portraits of people long dead. But in the corner stood the woman from the dining hall, the one in the 1920s dress. Her smile was gone now, replaced by sorrow. Her gray, lifeless face looked painfully familiar. She stepped forward, her movements slow and broken. In her hands, she held a small bundle wrapped in torn cloth. "Help me," she whispered. Richard froze, his eyes widening as he finally recognized her. It was Martha, or what was left of her. The woman lifted the cloth, revealing a photograph of the two of them taken on their honeymoon. But something was wrong. In the picture, they stood smiling in front of the same ship, the Golden Horizon. Before he could react, the woman's mouth opened, letting out a gutter, inhuman sound that shook the walls. The lights flickered violently, and the ship lurched as if struck by a wave. Richard was thrown to the floor, the knocking echoing again, louder and faster, like the ship itself was alive and screaming. Then, darkness. When he awoke, he was back in his cabin, drenched in sweat, the world silent. For a brief moment, he wondered if it had all been a nightmare, until he saw the photograph lying beneath his pillow. It was the same picture Martha had shown him. His hands shook as he looked around. The engines were silent. The Golden Horizon had stopped moving. Through the window, he saw an empty port. No people, no sounds. The crew was gone. The passengers were gone. He was alone, trapped in a silent ship floating in endless stillness. Somewhere behind him, faintly, he heard soft footsteps echoing in the corridor. The woman in the 1920s dress was still there, waiting for the next soul to join her. Next story, the Celtic Spirit was a shining cruise ship known for its beauty and luxury. Passengers who boarded it expected sunshine, laughter, and endless relaxation. But what they found instead would stay with them forever. What began as a dream vacation soon turned into an unspeakable nightmare. The story started with the ship's maiden voyage after its grand refitting. Families, newlyweds, and retirees boarded with laughter and excitement, ready for a week of paradise. Among them was Rachel, a 30-year-old teacher from Maine who had been craving a break from her busy life. She wasn't alone. Her elderly grandmother, Nora, who had dreamed of this trip for years, joined her, along with her boyfriend Ethan, a quiet man fascinated by history. From the moment they stepped aboard, everything looked perfect. The The ship gleamed with golden chandeliers, the air smelled of salt and perfume, and the crew greeted them with warm smiles. Still, Rachel couldn't shake the strange feeling that something was off, like the sea itself was quietly watching them. She ignored it, convincing herself it was just nerves. The first night passed peacefully with laughter, soft music, and fine food. Yet Rachel noticed her grandmother acting strangely. Nora, usually cheerful and chatty, seemed distant. She kept staring out of the cabin window, whispering to herself as if listening for something. When Rachel asked if she was all right, Nora gave a faint smile and said she was fine, but the look in her eyes said otherwise. Rachel tried to brush it off, but unease crept into her mind. On the second night, that unease turned to fear. Around midnight, a loud banging startled Rachel awake. She sat up, heart pounding, and saw Ethan already awake, his face pale. The pounding continued, hard, fast, and violent, like someone trying to break the door down. Ethan hesitated before opening it, but when he did, no one was there. The hallway was empty, the air unnaturally cold, and the lights flickered weakly overhead. "It's just the wind," Ethan said, but even he didn't believe his own words. The next morning, Rachel asked the crew if anyone else had reported strange things. They all smiled politely, claiming everything was normal, but their eyes told a different story. Some looked nervous, others avoided eye contact completely. Rachel noticed how the crew would glance at one another whenever someone mentioned the ship's history. Something was being kept secret. On the third night, her fears became reality. Rachel woke up to find her grandmother gone. The bed was unmade, the balcony door wide open, and the curtains fluttered in the cold breeze. Panic surged through her. She and Ethan searched the ship frantically, shouting her name through empty corridors, but Nora was nowhere to be found. The crew organized a search, but hours passed with no trace. The ship grew heavy with dread. Whispers spread among the passengers about the ship's dark past, about people who had vanished before. Some claimed to hear soft voices at night. Others spoke of tapping sounds from inside the walls or ghostly figures near the lower decks. Desperate to understand, Rachel began searching for answers herself. She visited the library, combing through old records until she found something horrifying. The Celtic Spirit had not always been a cruise liner. Before its luxury refitting, it had been a cargo ship, and before that, a military vessel. During World War II, it had taken part in a naval battle off the Atlantic coast and collided with an enemy ship. Hundreds died in the icy waters. Survivors of that tragedy had spoken of eerie voices in the night, of shadowy figures in the fog, and a sense of doom that grew stronger before the ship finally sank. Now Rachel realized that the company that owned the ship had buried its past, pretending it was new. But the dead had never left. They were still here, bound to the ship that had claimed their lives, and they were restless. On the fourth night, Rachel woke again to knocking on the door, the same rhythm as before, but this time a voice followed it, a voice she knew too well. "Rachel, come to me," her grandmother's voice. Frozen with fear, Rachel clutched Ethan's hand. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Ethan nodded, his face white. "It's her," he said. "It's Grandma." Together they followed the sound through the empty corridors, guided by that hauntingly familiar voice. It led them deeper into the ship, down narrow staircases where the air grew freezing cold and the lights flickered like dying candles. The further they went, the quieter everything became, as though the entire ship had stopped breathing. Finally, they reached a part of the vessel that had been sealed off, a lower deck closed to passengers. The heavy door stood slightly open, creaking with each movement. Rachel hesitated, then stepped inside. The room was vast and shadowed, filled with broken machinery and the scent of salt and decay. There, in the center, stood Nora. She didn't move. Her eyes were wide and glassy, fixed on something unseen. "Grandma!" Rachel cried, running to her. But the moment she touched her arm, she recoiled. Nora's skin was ice cold. Slowly, her grandmother turned her head, and Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Nora's face had twisted into a grotesque grin, her eyes black and hollow. Her voice came out as a raspy whisper that chilled the air. "I'm with them now, Rachel. I'm one of them." The room around them began to warp, the walls bending and shifting like the ship itself was alive. From the corners of the room, dark shapes began to emerge, figures of long-dead sailors, their faces twisted in pain, their uniforms torn and soaked with seawater. Their hollow eyes glowed faintly in the dark as they drifted closer, surrounding Rachel and Ethan. The ship groaned as if it were mourning, and the air filled with the sounds of whispers and distant screams. Rachel tried to run, but the walls closed in. The last thing she heard before everything went black was her grandmother's voice, now distant and cold. "Once the sea takes you, you belong to it forever." The Celtic spirit never reached its next port. When rescue crews finally found it, the ship was drifting aimlessly under a stormy sky, its lights flickering weakly in the mist. Not a single soul was found aboard. Every cabin, every deck, silent. The passengers who had once dreamed of a perfect voyage had vanished without a trace, claimed by the restless spirits of the past. And still, the Celtic spirit sails on, a ghost ship bound to the endless sea, waiting patiently for the next group of unsuspecting travelers to step aboard. The next story began with the Sea Phantom, a cruise ship that carried a far darker reputation. Few spoke of it openly, but those who had sailed on it whispered of strange happenings, passengers who disappeared without warning, sudden accidents no one could explain, and an ever-present feeling that something unseen lurked aboard. Most brushed off the rumors as sea tales, but those who returned from the Sea Phantom came back changed, their eyes haunted by what they had witnessed. In the summer of 1989, a new story began, one that would turn the ship's legend into pure terror. 4 college friends had booked the cruise to celebrate the end of their exams. There was Rachel, the bold and adventurous one, her boyfriend Mark, easygoing and skeptical, Tara, her childhood friend who loved all things paranormal, and Danny, the group's joker who never took anything seriously. At first, everything seemed perfect. The ship was modern, luxurious, filled with music and laughter, but on the second night, things began to shift. Rachel and Mark were on the deck, watching the moonlight shimmer across the calm sea, when Rachel felt it, the sensation of being watched. The air grew heavy, the warmth of the night fading into a cold that bit at her skin. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. Mark frowned. "Feel what?" he asked. But before she could answer, a scream tore through the night. It wasn't a scream of joy. It was raw, terrified, human. It echoed through the ship's halls like a warning. The couple ran inside, meeting Tara and Danny, who had heard it too. "Someone's in trouble," Tara said, her eyes wide. But when they asked the crew, the staff simply smiled and said it was nothing but the sound of the engines. Their calmness felt unnatural, rehearsed, like they had said it many times before. That night, the 4 friends decided to investigate. Armed with flashlights and curiosity, they made their way to the lower decks. Danny cracked jokes to ease the tension, but as they descended, the air thickened with an invisible weight. The silence became suffocating. They reached a door marked Crew Quarters, authorized personnel only. Rachel turned the handle, expecting it to be locked, but it creaked open. The hallway inside was dark and damp, the walls covered with strange carved symbols that seemed to move in the shadows. The smell of mold and salt filled their lungs. Then, the scream came again, closer this time, echoing from just around the corner. Without thinking, Rachel ran toward it, the others following. What they saw made their blood freeze. A man stood before them, thin and ghostly pale, his clothes tattered, his skin stretched tight over his bones. His eyes stared at them with desperate pleading. "Help me," he croaked, his voice trembling. "Please, help me." Before anyone could move, his body began to twist, his face contorting in pain. His skin seemed to melt, his bones snapping inward until there was nothing left but a heap of gray ash and the sickening sound of whispers. Danny stumbled back, choking out. "What the hell was that?" His voice trembled. Tara clung to Rachel, her face white with terror. "That wasn't human," she whispered. "That can't be real." But Rachel could feel it. The weight of something unseen pressing down on them, ancient and angry, as if the ship itself was awake and aware of their presence. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, her voice trembling but determined. The others nodded quickly, ready to leave, but as they turned, the hallway around them seemed to change. The walls stretched and twisted, forming dark, endless corridors that made no sense. Whispers filled the air, soft, cold voices that came from everywhere at once, from the walls, from the floor, from the air itself. Footsteps echoed behind them, though no one was there. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and when they came back on, the man appeared again. His skin was gray and rotted, his hollow eyes staring right at them. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered, his voice like ice scraping through their ears. Panic hit the group like a wave. They bolted toward the elevator, slamming toward. He buttoned over and over, but the doors didn't open. Tara screamed as the lights dimmed again. The ship had locked them in. They could feel it. It was alive, and it was angry. The air grew thicker, heavier, pressing against their lungs. The whispers grew louder, faster, more frantic, until it sounded like the walls themselves were whispering their names. The shadows pulsed and moved, crawling across the floor like living things. Mark's face turned white. "We need to get off this ship now," he gasped, but the ship wasn't letting them go. As they ran for the exit, the walls seemed to close in, pulling them deeper into its dark heart. The shadows reached for them, and then came the screams, hundreds of them from every direction, blending with the sound of the ship groaning like a dying beast. No one ever saw the group again. Weeks later, the Sea Phantom was found drifting quietly across the ocean. Its engines were dead, and not a single person was on board. The ship looked untouched, lights flickering weakly, tables still set for dinner, rooms perfectly clean, but there was no life, no sound except for the faint hum of the sea. Authorities searched for weeks, scanning the waters for debris or signs of disaster, but there was nothing. It was as though the ship had simply appeared out of nowhere. Rumors began to spread among sailors and fishermen. Stories of a ghost ship seen on foggy nights, its lights faintly glowing far out on the horizon. Some say that if you listen closely, you can still hear the screams of those who vanished, carried by the wind across the waves. The Sea Phantom, they say, still sails out there, trapped between worlds, its doomed passengers forever reliving the night they tried to uncover its secrets. Next story. The Elysium Voyager was a grand, modern cruise ship that departed from San Francisco for a 7-day trip to the Hawaiian Islands. It was celebrated as a masterpiece of ocean travel, filled with luxurious dining, glowing chandeliers, and breathtaking views of the Pacific. Among the passengers were 4 close friends from university who hadn't seen each other in years. There was Sarah, quiet and thoughtful; Emily, cheerful and full of energy; Tom, charming but often sarcastic; and Mark, the light-hearted joker of the group. They were in their mid-30s and ready for a much-needed break from their busy lives. As the Elysium Voyager sailed out to sea, the group laughed on the deck, drinks in hand, watching the sunset. The gentle waves and the golden sky made everything feel perfect, but that peace didn't last long. On the second night, Sarah woke up to a strange sound, a deep humming that seemed to come from under the floor. At first, she ignored it, assuming it was the ship's machinery, but as the hours passed, it grew louder, almost like a voice humming a tune only she could hear. She shook Emily awake. "Do you hear that?" Sarah whispered. Emily yawned, rubbing her eyes. "Hear what?" "The hum. It's coming from the walls," Sarah said. Emily listened but heard nothing. "Go back to sleep," she mumbled. Sarah lay back down, but the sound didn't stop. It seemed to vibrate inside her chest. The next morning, she told the others, but they laughed it off. "It's probably just the engines," Tom said. Still, Sarah couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. That night, the humming returned, louder than before, and this time, she heard faint whispers mixed with it, like voices trying to speak from behind the walls. The next day, Sarah went to the reception desk. The woman there, Clara, smiled politely. "It's nothing to worry about, ma'am," she said. "The newer ships sometimes make odd noises. We're still fine-tuning a few systems." But Sarah noticed the dark circles under Clara's eyes, the way her smile didn't quite reach her face. Something about her felt wrong, like she was hiding something. As the days went on, the strange things only got worse. The humming grew louder, sometimes vibrating the furniture. At night, Sarah began to see things. A tall, thin shadow in the halls, always standing just at the edge of the light. One night, she saw it clearly. It was motionless, almost human-shaped, but blacker than darkness itself. When she stepped toward it, it vanished. She ran back to her cabin, heart pounding, where the others were waiting. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Tom joked nervously. Sarah didn't laugh. "I saw something," she said quietly. "A shadow, a figure. It was real." Mark tried to calm her, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the ship was alive and that something inside it was watching. That night, she couldn't sleep. She turned over in bed, restless, until she heard it again, a soft creak in the corner of the room. She looked up and froze. A pale face with hollow eyes was staring at her from the darkness. It didn't move. It only watched. Sarah screamed, and when Emily turned on the light, the face was gone. The next morning, the ship felt different, too still, too quiet. Some passengers looked pale and scared, whispering to each other. Sarah stood abruptly during breakfast. "I'm leaving this ship," she said. Emily tried to calm her down, but Sarah shook her head. "No, you don't understand. There's something here. It's real." Mark sighed. "You're imagining things." But that night, as the ship sailed into the Black Pacific, everything changed. The humming reached a deafening pitch, the lights flickered, and then the entire ship went dark. A single, horrible scream echoed through the halls. Passengers ran through the corridors, their faces twisted in fear. "It's coming!" one woman screamed. Sarah grabbed Emily's arm. "We have to go." But deep down, she already knew they couldn't escape. The ship began to shake violently, the sound of metal twisting echoing through the dark. That's when Clara appeared again, but she was different. Her skin was pale, her eyes empty. "You don't understand," Clara whispered. "The ship is a prison. We can't escape." Before Sarah could speak, Clara vanished into the shadows, swallowed whole. The ship lurched violently, as if something enormous had grabbed it from beneath. Then, silence. When rescuers found the Elysium Voyager days later, it was drifting aimlessly, lights faintly glowing through the fog. Every cabin was empty, every corridor silent. Not a single soul was left aboard. But those who later boarded the ship for inspection said they still heard it, the faint hum echoing through the metal halls, like the ship itself was still alive, still waiting. Next story. It was a cool October evening when the Sea Voyager, another luxury liner, departed from New Orleans for a 4-day cruise through the Gulf of Mexico. Families, couples, and travelers filled the decks, ready for a peaceful escape, endless food, live shows, and open sea air. But none of them knew they had boarded something that would soon become their worst nightmare. The ship glimmered under the lights, grand and inviting, but by the second night, strange things began to happen. A couple reported hearing knocks on their cabin door at 2 a.m. When they opened it, the hallway was empty. Another passenger, an older man named Mr. Gilbert, said he saw a woman in a white gown standing at the ship's railing. When he called out to her, she vanished. The crew brushed it off as stress or imagination, but more stories followed, too many to ignore. One evening, a group of passengers gathered in the lounge, trading their unsettling experiences over drinks. A young woman named Sarah spoke softly, her hands trembling around her glass. "I don't know if I should say this," she said, "but last night I heard something, crying, a child crying. I followed the sound to a corridor I'd never seen before. It was dark, like a storage area, and I swear something was there, a shadow, moving. The others stared at her, uneasy. I ran back to my room," she continued, "but I could still hear it, inside the walls." Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the room. The lights flickered and went out. When they came back on, one woman, Claire, was gone. She had been sitting across from Sarah just seconds ago. Panic spread. The crew searched every deck, every room, but there was no trace of her. By morning, more passengers were missing. The ship felt cursed. Some claimed to see moving shadows. Others said they saw Claire walking through the halls, but her eyes were empty, her skin gray. Rumors spread like wildfire, stories of haunted ships, restless spirits, or a curse at sea. That night, as the sun sank behind the horizon, the remaining passengers gathered in fear. Sarah, trembling, spoke again. "I think I know what's happening," she said. "There's an old legend about a ship called the Serena that vanished 50 years ago. They said it was haunted. Everyone on board disappeared just like us. Some say the sea took it, but others say it never left. It just changed its name and kept sailing." The others fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Somewhere deep in the ship, a soft knock echoed through the walls, as if something was listening. I didn't want to believe it, but now I do. I think the Serena didn't disappear. I think it's still here, trapped, and somehow this ship is part of it. This isn't the Sea Voyager anymore. It's a vessel for the spirits of the dead, drifting endlessly between worlds. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and the entire lounge went dark. When the lights came back on, Sarah was gone. The passengers screamed, calling her name, but there was no sign of her anywhere. Just like the others before her, she had vanished, leaving behind nothing but a heavy silence that seemed to breathe through the walls. In the days that followed, the ship drifted without direction, gliding slowly through the gulf as if lost in time. All radio contact with the outside world was dull. 1. No one on board knew what was happening or even where they were, but as the hours passed, the whispers grew louder, soft voices from nowhere, like memories of the past repeating themselves. One by one, the others vanished too, the crew, the passengers, the musicians, until the halls were empty. When the Sea Voyager was finally found weeks later, floating alone in the open sea, there was no one aboard. Not a single trace of life remained, only the sound of waves brushing against its hull and the faint echoes of what once was. No one ever solved the mystery of the ship or the fate of those who vanished. But some say, on quiet nights, if you listen closely, you can still hear the cries of the lost souls, trapped forever between the living and the dead. The Mirage Queen was a brand new cruise ship that had quickly become famous for its luxury and flawless service. It was a massive, shining vessel built to impress, offering a dreamlike voyage for anyone lucky enough to afford a ticket. Among the passengers on its maiden trip were Rachel and Ben, a young couple who had been together for 3 years. Their lives had been stressful lately, and this trip was supposed to be their perfect escape, a week of calm in the Caribbean. From the moment they stepped aboard, everything looked flawless. The decks gleamed under the sun, and the crew greeted them with practiced smiles. But deep down, Rachel felt something strange, a faint unease that she couldn't explain. It hovered at the edge of her mind like a whisper she couldn't quite hear. She tried to brush it off, telling herself it was just nerves. She wanted this trip to be perfect. But by the second night, that unease turned into real fear. They were at a cocktail party on the main deck, surrounded by laughter and music, yet Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every few minutes, she caught sight of eyes, cold, unblinking eyes, staring at her from the crowd. But whenever she turned to look, the person was gone, like smoke fading into the air. "You okay?" Ben asked, noticing her tense expression. Rachel forced a smile and nodded. "Just tired," she said softly. Later in their cabin, she lay in bed while Ben slept beside her, his breathing slow and even. But the walls felt closer now, the air heavier. She turned toward him, and for a second she thought she saw someone standing behind him, a dark figure, tall and still, but when she blinked, it was gone. The next morning, Rachel tried to tell herself it had just been a dream, but the feeling stayed. The strange humming noise she'd heard on the first night was back, deep and steady, echoing from somewhere far below the decks. It was as if the ship itself was alive, its pulse thrumming through the metal floors. They spent the next few days exploring the Mirage Queen, trying to enjoy their time. It was breathtaking, gleaming glass walls, endless pools, fine dining, and grand shows. But no matter where she went, Rachel couldn't escape that crawling feeling on her skin, the sense that something unseen was watching her every move. One evening, while wandering through the quieter parts of the ship, they found a narrow hallway with a single old door at the end. It was slightly open, the space beyond completely dark. Rachel hesitated, but Ben grinned. "Come on," he said. "What's the worst that could happen?" Against her better judgment, she followed him in. The air inside was thick and stale, and the faint humming grew louder with each step. The walls were bare metal, the floor damp. The further they went, the stronger the dread grew inside her. "Ben, I don't like this," she whispered, her voice trembling. But Ben was already ahead, curious. "Just a little further," he called back. "Maybe it's the engine room." Then the humming stopped. Silence filled the corridor, heavy and unnatural. A low, mournful moan echoed from somewhere ahead. It sounded human, but not quite. Rachel's heart raced. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "D." Ben nodded, his voice shaky. "Let's go." They turned back, but before they could reach the door, it slammed shut with a thunderous bang. The lights went out. The hum returned, deeper, vibrating through their bones. The walls began to shake. "Rachel, I can't see!" Ben yelled, his voice fading. Rachel's hands brushed against the cold, wet metal. "Help!" she screamed, but her voice vanished into the dark, swallowed hole. Then she heard it. A whisper, close to her ear. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was soft but sharp, like a knife in her mind. "Who's there?" she cried, but the whisper only grew louder. It surrounded her, echoing in every direction. She turned toward Ben. but he was gone. The space where he stood was empty. "Ben, where are you?" she screamed, but only silence answered. Out of the blackness, a figure slowly emerged. It was tall, unnaturally thin, its limbs long and twisted, its face hidden in shadows. But Rachel saw its eyes, wide, glowing faintly in the dark. It was watching her. "You shouldn't have come here," it said again, the voice now deep and cold. "Now you will stay." Rachel tried to run, but her body wouldn't move. The creature reached out, its long skeletal fingers brushing her skin. The touch burned like ice. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The darkness swallowed her whole. When Rachel opened her eyes, she was back in her cabin. The hum of the ship filled the air again. Everything looked normal. Ben was beside her asleep. Her heart pounded as she tried to steady her breathing. Maybe it had all been a nightmare. But then, something caught her eye. The mirror across the room. Her reflection wasn't alone. Behind her stood the same tall, gaunt figure, its glowing eyes locked on hers. And this time, it was smiling. The Elysium Dream was the newest and grandest cruise ship ever built, a floating palace promising luxury beyond imagination. It had left Los Angeles just a week earlier, filled with excited travelers, movie stars, and wealthy businessmen eager for the perfect escape. It was meant to be a dream voyage. Instead, it became a descent into something far darker. The first few days were perfect. Guests marveled at the shimmering pools, glass-walled decks, and lavish dining halls. The air buzzed with music, laughter, and life. But by the third night, the mood began to shift. Something in the air changed. The ship no longer felt warm and alive. It felt cold, hollow. Strange noises echoed through the hallways at night, low, heavy thuds that came from nowhere. At first, people blamed the wind or the machinery, but the sounds grew louder, closer, as if something was moving beneath them. By the fourth night, guests began whispering about shadows, shapes that slipped across their walls when no one else was there. Some even heard faint voices whispering just behind their ears. Among the passengers was Emily, traveling with her fiancé, Greg. She didn't believe in ghosts or curses, but even she could feel the growing tension aboard the ship. Greg, however, was thrilled. He loved ghost stories and had already heard rumors about the ship's dark history. The Elysium Dream, he learned, wasn't the first ship with that name. Decades ago, there had been another, one that had vanished completely while crossing the Pacific. No wreckage was ever found, no survivors. Some believed it had sunk during a storm, others said it was cursed. But when this new ship was built, they said it had been constructed right over the wreck of the first one, as if the dead had been sealed beneath its steel floors, waiting to rise again. Greg spent hours digging into the ship's past, and what he found made his blood run cold. Many passengers from the first Elysium Dream had vanished without a trace, and those few who survived told stories of strange noises right before people disappeared, noises that matched what passengers were hearing now. Every account shared one terrifying detail. The ship was haunted by something ancient and evil. One night, after dinner, Emily and Greg went for a walk on the upper deck, hoping some fresh air would help shake the growing fear that clung to everyone on board. The sea stretched endlessly around them, calm and glassy under the moonlight. The stars shimmered above, and for a moment, it felt peaceful. But then they saw him, a crew member standing at the far end of the deck, facing the ocean. His uniform was old, decades out of date, from a time long before the ship had even been built. He didn't move. He just stared out at the horizon, completely still. As they approached, they saw how pale his face was, his eyes hollow, his expression empty. He turned slowly toward them, his gaze cold and unblinking. When he spoke, his voice rasped like wind through broken metal. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "You've disturbed it. It's awake now. It will claim you all." Before either of them could respond, the man turned and faded into the shadows, disappearing completely. They ran to where he had been standing, but there was no sign of him. No footprints, no sound, nothing. It was as though he had never existed. That night, the ship's mood changed. The air grew heavy, the walls seemed to groan, and the strange sounds grew louder, echoing through the corridors like a heartbeat. Then the disappearances began. Guests vanished in their rooms. Crew members stopped showing up for shifts. Locked cabins were found empty, the air inside thick with a faint smell of rot. Panic spread through the ship. Emily and Greg realized the stories weren't myths, they were warnings. The Elysium Dream was cursed, and the souls of those lost on the original ship were trapped aboard this one, doomed to relive their deaths again and again. The more they searched for answers, the more they understood that the force haunting the ship was feeding, growing stronger with every soul it took. They managed to find one woman still alive who knew the truth. Her name was Helen, an elderly passenger who had been on the first Elysium Dream decades ago. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she spoke, eyes wide with terror. "It's the ship," Helen whispered. "It feeds on us. Every voyage makes it stronger. It doesn't let anyone go. Once it has you, there's no escape." Before Emily or Greg could react, the ship began to shake violently. The sea churned like it was boiling, massive waves crashing against the hull. The lights flickered wildly as the ship groaned, metal twisting as if the very structure were screaming. A blinding flash of light tore across the deck, and suddenly, a figure appeared, towering, cloaked in darkness, its eyes glowing like fire. The air froze. Passengers screamed as the figure stretched out long, bony hands, pulling people into the dark void one by one. Those who had vanished were now visible, ghostly faces in the shadows, their mouths open in silent cries. Emily and Greg ran, but the ship seemed to change around them. Hallways stretched endlessly, doors vanished, and the sound of rushing water filled their ears. Ghostly shapes filled the corridors, whispering, reaching out, surrounding them. They reached the railing, gasping for air, only to see the ocean below, black and swirling, alive with movement. It was like the sea itself was breathing, pulling the ship down into its depths. The Elysium Dream never returned to port. Weeks later, a faint distress signal was found drifting across the waves, but when rescuers arrived, they found nothing but wreckage. No crew, no passengers, no bodies. The ship was gone. Only silence remained, and the ocean kept its secret. Some say the Elysium Dream still sails somewhere out there, trapped in an endless loop of death and sorrow. And if you're ever at sea on a quiet night and you see a glowing ship drifting through the mist, don't look too long. It might see you, too. The Starry Seas was the newest marvel of the ocean, a glittering city floating across the waves, filled with rooftop gardens, elegant lounges, and even a shopping mall. It promised the perfect escape for those who could afford it. Megan and Jason, a young couple, had been dreaming about this trip for months. It was supposed to be their long-awaited getaway, a break from the stress of daily life. When they finally boarded the Starry Seas, it felt like stepping into paradise. The crew greeted them warmly, offering cocktails and smiles, and the ship itself gleamed beneath the sunlight. Megan was thrilled, certain this would be the best week of her life. But beneath the excitement, she couldn't shake a strange feeling, a faint chill that lingered just out of reach, as if something unseen was watching them. She tried to ignore it, telling herself she was just tired, but as the days passed, the unease grew stronger. The crew, though polite, seemed oddly stiff, and some passengers looked nervous, for no clear reason. Even the ship's design felt wrong, the hallways too long, too empty, with doors that led to nowhere. On the second night, after dinner, Megan and Jason strolled along the outer deck. The moon hung low over the calm sea, painting everything in silver light. The air was quiet, too quiet. The soft hum of the engines was gone, and even their footsteps sounded muted. Then a voice came from the shadows. "You shouldn't be here." Megan froze, her heart hammering. She turned toward the sound, but saw nothing. "What's wrong?" Jason asked. "I thought I heard someone," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Didn't you?" Jason shook his head. "No one's here. You're just tired. Come on, let's go back." Back in their cabin, Megan locked the door and tried to calm herself, but the fear wouldn't fade. The next day, things got stranger. While walking alone down a quiet hallway, he noticed something that hadn't been there before, a large, ornate wooden door at the far end. It looked ancient, carved with strange patterns that didn't match the ship's modern interior. Curious but nervous, she walked toward it. The door was slightly open, revealing a dimly lit room beyond. Against her better judgment, she pushed it wider and stepped inside. The air was thick and stale. A single old armchair sat in the corner facing the wall. The rest of the room was bare. The smell of decay lingered in the air. Megan's skin prickled. She turned to leave, then heard a slow creaking sound, like someone shifting in the chair behind her. Her breath caught. She spun around. The chair was empty. "Hello?" she whispered. No answer. But in the mirror across the room she saw it, a faint shadow, the outline of a person standing perfectly still in the corner, watching her. Megan screamed, slamming the door shut and running back to her cabin. Jason opened the door, alarmed. What happened? There was something in there, she gasped. A shadow, a person. I saw it move. Jason frowned. You're exhausted. It's just your imagination. Let's rest, okay? Megan nodded, but deep down she knew what she'd seen. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every sound made her jump, the whisper of air vents, the faint groan of the ship. Then came a soft knock on the door. Tap, tap, tap. She froze. Another knock, louder this time. Her hands trembled as she crept to the door. Slowly, she opened it. No one was there. The hallway was empty and silent. But at the far end, she saw it again. The same old wooden door, open wide. The door that didn't belong. Against every instinct screaming inside her, she stepped toward it. The air grew colder with each step, and somewhere deep inside the ship, she could hear faint whispers calling her name. She felt a cold wind brush past her, the air heavy with dread. The closer she got to the door, the thicker the feeling became, pressing against her chest like an invisible weight. She stepped inside, her pulse racing, but this time the room wasn't the same. It wasn't empty anymore. The chair in the corner was now occupied. Sitting there was a figure, pale, lifeless, its hollow eyes locked on her and a twisted grin frozen across its face. It wasn't human anymore, yet it looked right at her, as though it had been waiting all along. Megan gasped and stumbled backward. The door slammed shut behind her, the echo of the impact vibrating through the room. In the distance, the voice came again, clearer than before, low and chilling. You shouldn't have come here. Next story. The Mystic Horizon was known as a ship of dreams, a luxury cruise liner that took travelers on breathtaking voyages across the Pacific. For years, it was called one of the finest ships to ever sail. Lavish dining, glittering entertainment, endless ocean views. But for those who knew its hidden history, there was one warning always whispered in secret. Never board the Mystic Horizon after dark. The story began with 4 friends, David, Claire, Luke, and Sarah, who had been planning their trip for months. They wanted to escape their busy lives and spend a week on the open sea, surrounded by calm waters and adventure. None of them knew the ship's dark past, nor believed the tales of strange disappearances that had haunted it for years. They only saw the excitement ahead. The first few days were perfect. Sunset dinners, shopping on deck, and dancing until midnight. But soon, things began to feel wrong. It started one night when Sarah and Claire were sitting at the bar, laughing over drinks. They noticed a group of crew members at the far end of the lounge, whispering among themselves. Their faces were pale, their eyes distant, and the room suddenly felt cold. When one crew member caught Sarah watching, she turned away sharply and motioned for the others to leave. That's weird, Claire whispered. Have you seen them act like that before? Sarah shook her head, uneasy, but tried to laugh it off. Maybe they were just busy. Still, something about the silence that followed stayed with her. They decided to call it a night and return to their cabins, unaware that things were about to change. As the hours passed and the ship drifted deeper into the dark ocean, David and Luke went out to the observation deck. The night was calm. Too calm. The sea was endless and black, and the air felt heavy, unmoving. Then David noticed something, a faint light on the horizon. It flickered strangely, glowing and fading like it was struggling to stay lit. Is that another ship? He whispered. Luke squinted. Maybe. But it looks too far out, and it's not steady. They watched the light, unable to look away, until it suddenly vanished, swallowed by the darkness. Before they could speak, the captain's voice echoed across the loudspeakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing minor technical difficulties. Please stay in your cabins until further notice. His tone was calm, but something about it made their stomachs twist. They obeyed, though the unease lingered. By morning, everything seemed normal again, but only on the surface. Claire overheard 2 crew members whispering about something they called the fog. When she asked what they meant, they froze, exchanging terrified glances before walking away without a word. That night, the strange feeling grew stronger. At dinner, the group noticed how odd the ship had become. The staff moved slowly, their faces blank, their eyes empty. The food tasted bland, the laughter of other passengers sounded forced, and even the music seemed distant, warped like an old recording. Later that night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The silence in her cabin was unbearable. She decided to walk through the quiet halls, hoping the air outside would help clear her head. That's when she saw it, a door she had never noticed before. It was small, tucked away at the end of a dim hallway. The door was cracked open, and a faint light came from inside. Drawn by curiosity, she stepped closer. The room beyond was filled with old photographs, faded items from another time, things that didn't belong on a modern ship. At the far end stood a large mirror covered in dust. But as Sarah approached, something was off. Her reflection didn't move the way she did. It hesitated, staring back at her with eyes that didn't feel like her own. Then came a voice, faint and chilling. "Get out." She spun around, but the room was empty. The photographs hung silently, and the air was still. Her heart pounded as she stumbled backward and slammed the door shut. She hurried down the hall, certain she was being watched. That night, she told the others what she had seen. They laughed nervously, insisting it was just her imagination. But even as they spoke, the same dread began to settle over them all. As the ship continued its voyage, strange things became impossible to ignore. The crew grew silent and mechanical. Passengers whispered of figures standing in their cabins at night, shadows that vanished when the lights turned on. Sometimes they heard voices coming from the walls, calling names that no one recognized. On the fourth night, everything changed. A thick fog rolled in, blanketing the entire ship. The air turned damp and freezing. The engines sputtered and died, and the lights began to flicker. The ship drifted aimlessly, swallowed by the mist. Then the captain's voice came again, but this time it didn't sound human. "This is your final warning. Leave now." The sound was warped, echoing through the halls. Panic broke out. Passengers ran for the lifeboats, but the corridors twisted around them, leading in endless loops. The ship was alive, shifting, trapping them inside. Through the fog, the faint flickering light appeared again on the horizon, the same one David and Luke had seen before. But this time, it was closer. What happened next, no one truly knows. Weeks later, when rescue teams found the mystic horizon, it was drifting silently through the Pacific. Every cabin was empty, every log erased. The passengers and crew were gone. The ship floated without a sound, the fog still clinging to its decks. Some say it crossed into another world, one where lost souls wander the endless sea forever, trapped in the mist. And even now, sailors whisper that if you listen carefully near that stretch of ocean, you can still hear the faint echoes of voices calling out from the fog, the doomed passengers of the mystic horizon begging to be found.